you positive heads out there. It's so good to be back with all you beautiful reflections of the one source consciousness that creates and animates all things. If you're new to this podcast, of course, we are super happy to have you here, and we just ask that you bring an open mind and heart to your listening experience and to be prepared to explore vantage points that I'm convinced will help shift or solidify your current understanding of the ultimate nature of reality in a way that is extremely empowering. Speaking of exploring powerful perspectives, I would like to gift my book, The Golden Key, Modern Alchemy to Unlock Infinite Abundance to you at goldenkey.gift, where you can get the audio or ebook as my gift to you by using the code POSITIVEHEAD at checkout. All right, all you positive heads. On this week's Soul Share episode, I'm very excited to have Dr. Eben Alexander back here with me on the show for the first time since 2016. And not only is he back, but he is here with Karen Newell, the co-author of the book Living in a Mindful Universe that they released together back in 2017. Hello, Eben. Hello, Karen. Welcome to the show, my friends.
Hello, Brandon. It's great to be here. Thanks for having us on.
Yes, I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Likewise. This is, I got to say, this has been, when people ask me what is one of my favorite episodes, our episode, it was in January 2016, is one that I often will mention because you're such a great storyteller and your story is so incredible, Eben. So yeah, after 1,700 episodes, you still make it in the you still get into my list of fave highlight moments. So
well, I am so glad to hear that, and of course, what people are about to discover is my best half, Karen, really adds a lot to the mix.
Ah, well, you know what? My better half is a Karen, and so I definitely understand that. And it's funny because I always think of or a lot of times people will bring up to her that, especially a year or so ago, she works also with sound, working as a speech therapist. And as you guys will hear, that is Karen Newell's sort of sound specialty as well. And, she would always hear from her students as a speech therapist, about this whole Karen thing that was so like prolific for, you have like a year or 2 years of every student would laugh about it, and she thought it was great, and even dressed up as a Karen for Halloween, so it was Meta Karen.
There's a lot of us out there.
There's a lot of you out there, and she's one of the coolest people I know. So I imagine it's the same with you, Karen, and I look forward to learning more about you and your work. And for those who want to go back and listen to my original episode with Eben, it's episode 81. And it's, like I said, I often will reference it as one of my favorite episodes because, you're such a great storyteller. It's such an amazing story, as I mentioned. And so we'll touch on that. Maybe you can give the highlights of it here in a moment. But before we get a little bit of backstory from you both, I would like to start with my cliche opening question. And that is this. You're in an elevator. The woman next to you looks over, says, "What's your passion?" You got 10 floors to answer. What do you say?
Well, I would simply say my passion is fundamental nature of reality, of the mind-brain connection. How is it that this phenomenal world that we witness, how does that relate to any kind of ultimate reality? And what is our true potential for influencing that emerging reality? So it's all about understanding consciousness, and once you realize the only thing you've ever known is the inside of your own consciousness, then you can see why it might be valuable to start exploring it and learning about your true relationships with it.
And my passion is somewhat related, although I would use different language. My passion has everything to do with that four-letter word, love. I have always been curious about it. People write about it, and the words just kind of fall flat. I've eventually learned that love is an experience. It is a state. And so it is hard to describe it. That is my passion, is to bring that into my life and also help others bring it into theirs.
I love that. I love that answer, both those answers. And so, if you would, as I mentioned a moment ago, maybe give a little bit of your backstories, and then maybe how you ended up coming together, whatever feels relevant to share. Like I said, if you want to go really deep on Eben's story, episode 81, of course, the book Proof of Heaven. But maybe just take a few moments to share whatever feels relevant to share how you got here.
Yeah, I think I would just point out that my whole life growing up was spent in a scientific family. My father was a globally renowned neurosurgeon who taught neurosurgery to many budding neurosurgeons, and I always knew that science is the pathway to truth. Now, like many of us, born in the 60s and 70s, though, I made the mistake of assuming that the conventional form of kind of media presentation of science, materialist science, was that pathway. And that's what brings up free will. And for me, all of this is very exciting, this notion of understanding the brain-mind connection, the notion of consciousness. And it's a scientific question. And so many people in our world think that things like near-death experiences and these extraordinary phenomena, after-death communications, all these stories, for example, of reincarnation, past life memories in children, some people think they completely conflict with modern science. And the fact is, no, they do not. In fact, in many ways, modern science demands the existence of the spiritual realm to explain things. And you can't just get away with a simplistic, mechanistic, material realm explanation, certainly when it comes to derivation of consciousness. And so I'm a scientist, and I had an extraordinary experience back in 2008 in which I acquired a severe gram-negative bacterial meningoencephalitis that drove me deep into coma. One advantage of our current position is that since our last talk with you, Brandon, there was a case report on my medical records that was published in September 2018 in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases. It was by 3 physicians not involved in my care, but absolutely fascinated by my recovery. And that case report, I commented on it at a blog posting back in September 2018. But the bottom line is they pointed out 2 very important factors concerning my case. One is my brain was far too damaged from objective evidence from neurologic exams, scans, etc. My neocortex and brainstem were far too decimated by that infection for me to have any kind of dream or hallucination or confabulation, much less the most extraordinary experience I've ever had in my life. So to have all that happen when my brain was documented to be offline, that's why my story has tremendous cachet with the scientific community. And you'll find that's exactly where it's landed. And I work with scientists around the world, GalileoCommission.org, medical and scientific.net, many different groups studying consciousness. But the reality of this incredibly important awakening, and it's all certainly hinged in my experience in 2008 and about my reporting of it in 2012 in the book Proof of Heaven, is that the scientific world is changing radically towards a position acknowledging the fundamental nature of consciousness in the universe, towards the reality of what we call objective idealism, which is what Karen and I expound upon in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe. And really, working with Karen is the best part of it all, because she is the brilliant spiritual guide who helps me to kind of aim my scientific interpretation so that it actually makes sense in this much bigger spiritual perspective.
And so in light of that, when we first met, we were both exploring sound. I had been up to that for many years at this point, but Eben and I were both in a setting where we were exploring sound to get into expanded states of consciousness. And so there were, other people there, but I didn't know anything about Eben. This was in 2011, so before his book Proof of Heaven came out in 2012. And so he wasn't famous yet. But I knew he was a neurosurgeon, and word was he had had a near-death experience. And I knew others who had had near-death experiences. And so I was curious, just making conversation, just first met. And so I said, well, tell me, I knew that near-death experiencers often came back with these very profound, often very personal lessons that they learn. And so I got right to the heart of it and said, what was that personal lesson that you learned, from your near-death experience? And he says, the brain doesn't create consciousness. He was very much in his science mind, and that confused me because I was expecting something else. And I said, well, why would anyone think that? Why would anyone think the brain creates consciousness? And he revealed to me, he just kind of chuckled and said, well, that's what all materialist scientists believe. And I just didn't understand that that was the kind of fulcrum of their understanding, because I could never believe that. I always understood that we had a soul before we came into our bodies, and that awareness continues upon the physical death of the body. So the idea that the brain created consciousness to me made absolutely no sense. And for Eben, that was incredibly refreshing, that I wasn't even remotely in that worldview. And so this really began a whole series of conversations. And of course, I was very interested in what was that love you experienced? Because that's what a lot of near-death experiencers will talk about, and that Eben does speak about very well. But his passion lies in the science of it all. And so that's where we kind of bring these ideas together, where he can talk really that very valuable big picture science point of view, and then I can come in and say, well, what do all of those implications mean to each of us in our daily lives? How does that affect how we live our lives, and how can we learn more about that without having to have a severe life-threatening disease that almost kills us? And all of that is entirely possible, and that's what we now do together.
Well, that is amazing, and I love how you both came together. I think it's so necessary to look at, I always say, like, spirituality, science and spirituality are sort of two sides of the same coin, and it's like different vantage points from which to look at all of consciousness and the ultimate nature of reality. And one thing that came to mind when you were talking about the paper in 2018, I find it really interesting, and I'm curious, was, with your case, was it there particular breadcrumbs that sort of showed that I guess my question is, it different? The evidence that was there for you, was it somehow different than evidence of other people who had near-death experience, where it was more, verifiable?
Well, I think that's exactly why my case has such fascination with scientists. It's because, they could monitor every day during that week. They knew my neurologic exams. They knew from CT and MRI scans the extent of my infection. My brainstem was involved. And they had this well documented. And part of the picture is that, my case in many ways is unprecedented. So the two biggest points that the three doctors made in that paper, one was that I really could not have had a dream or hallucination, because those parts of my brain were inactive, very evident from the neurologic exams in particular. But the other very crucial point they make, and this is because they were challenged. They were challenged by the peer-reviewed scientific editors of the Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases, who said, wait a minute, this case is absurd. That's the word they use. They said, there's no other precedent for a case where somebody this ill with a gram-negative bacterial meningoencephalitis, 7 days in coma due to that, with those kind of neurologic exams, there's no recorded case of that kind of patient ever making a full recovery. And so two big mysteries. One was that I could have any experience at all, and of course to me, the mystery there was the extraordinary nature of it. It was more vibrant, real, alive, and detailed than any experience I'd ever had. How come that happens when your brain has been taken offline? And the other thing is the survival. They make it very clear that, my doctors estimated I went from a 10% chance of survival early in the week down to a 2% chance of survival late in the week. And at that point, on day 7 of coma, they recommended stopping the antibiotics, because there was no recorded case of somebody that ill from gram-negative bacterial meningoencephalitis who made a full recovery. And they thought my prospects, even if I was in that 2% survivor category, my prospects for a meaningful recovery and quality of life were pretty much nil. That's why they recommended stopping the antibiotics and letting nature take its course. So that is a giant mystery to anybody with an education in medical science who reviews my medical records, is how in the world did this full recovery happen? And not only that, as we discuss in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, extraordinary features of my journey. For example, memories are not stored in the brain. That was very, very clear from my experience. I was completely amnesic for my life during the coma, had no knowledge of humans or this universe. And in fact, when I woke up on day 7 of coma, looking around my bedside, I didn't even recognize my mother, my sisters, my sons, the people who were there. Although my memory of them and my language came back very rapidly, literally over hours and days, but all of my semantic knowledge of physics, neuroscience, cosmology returned over about 2 months. And the interesting thing to me, as we discuss in Living in a Mindful Universe, is the fact that those memories in many cases were much clearer and more detailed than they had been before the coma. Yeah. And we explain that in the book, but it's really an extraordinary kind of expression of the fact that memories are not stored in the brain at all. And then, of course, when you realize the evidence, we come in many different directions supporting this primacy of consciousness. But one of those directions is the scientific literature on reincarnation, past life memories in children. The University of Virginia group has more than 2,700 cases they've studied, 1,700 of which are, quote, solved. That is, they were able to actually identify the previous person who the child has described. So reincarnation, the data is there, is absolutely real. You can believe in it, not believe in it, doesn't matter. The scientific facts say it's an absolutely real phenomenon, so we have to understand how it works. And as a neuroscientist, I feel compelled to go deeply into that question of the brain-mind relationship and how our souls can be eternal, how we can have these kind of experiences, suggesting that we're much more than our physical body and our existence is much more than just birth to death. The upshot of that beautiful case report is that when they were challenged by the peer reviewers to say explain it, they explained it by saying, well, he had a near-death experience. And the peer reviewer said, oh, so that kind of spiritual dive can allow for this kind of miraculous healing. And the answer is yes. And they said, well, that's good enough for us, we'll publish it. So it just shows you the open-mindedness of modern medical scientists in realizing that you can pursue all this and try and pretend it's all a materialist pathway of understanding that will get you there, but ultimately you need to appeal beyond that materialist world. And that's where what you said earlier about science and spirituality kind of coexisting, I would say they cannot move forward without each other. Because really, to fully explain these experiences, you need some big fundamental concepts of spirituality. And I would say we can keep that definition very simple. Karen and I often say that spirituality is simply a sense of connection with others through that mental space, with our fellow beings and with the universe at large, and also a sense of shared meaning and purpose in our lives. You don't need anything else for spirituality. Some people get there through religion and religious practice, prayer, meditation. That's beautiful. I love it. But the reality is, you don't have to have religion for this kind of understanding. This is all about the modern neuroscience of consciousness and modern human experiences.
Yeah, that's just, I find it so fascinating because, of course, on the show, we talk a lot about stories of synchronicity, serendipity, spiritual breadcrumbs. I love good stories. Of course, your story is so amazing. And it's also, the Harvard, for those who don't know and haven't read the book or heard the original episode, we haven't even said you're a Harvard neurosurgeon. You weren't really into this spiritual world and stuff. And what do you know? The Harvard brain specialist gets, a disease of the brain. It's all of a sudden you went from being healthy one day to, in a coma the next. And then now, as the story continues to unfold, how it's being used as an example of, continuing to follow those breadcrumbs and sort of proving from a scientific standpoint that something truly is going on beyond physiologically. And it's amazing. And, something that you've both said, and of course, Karen, you talked about the heart being so crucial in this whole journey. I don't know if either of you are familiar with a former guest I had on the show who's quantum physicist Nassim Haramein. I don't know if you're familiar with him or not. He said, looking for consciousness in the brain is like looking inside a radio for the announcer. If the brain is the radio's receiver, then the heart is the dial tuning the radio to the frequency of your choice.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah. So,
Yeah. And what's interesting is that we have the ability to manage our heart's resonance, the frequency that it's emitting. Heart math tells us each of our hearts is emitting an electromagnetic field that seems to carry whatever emotional state we're in out into the world, and it influences the people around us. And so I know Nassim does a beautiful talk about the electromagnetic field as well, the torus field.
Yep.
And how the earth has one and every system has one, but the heart's electromagnetic field is enormous compared to the brain's. It's just huge. The magnetic part is 3,000 times bigger. And so it speaks to the power of the heart. And you know, the heart has no linguistic center. We don't have words there. It's a feeling state. It's the information that gets sent from the heart to the brain that then allows us to assign words to it. So, but I wanted to comment on, you know, you were saying Eben, as this Harvard neurosurgeon, he had this experience. I think it really speaks to the power of personal firsthand experience. If he had not had that experience, he claims now that if he read about it happening in someone else, he would have believed it. I'm not so sure about that.
No,
I think the passion behind it is much stronger, having had it happen to him personally. Right. So it is a beautiful thing.
I can't deny it.
Yeah, but the beautiful thing is we all can have these kinds of experiences. Right. We don't have to wait for them to happen spontaneously, although that's how many of these happen. We can cultivate them. And so that's where, you know, we really come together, because Eben can speak to the power of touching that aspect of the spiritual realm. Not only did it heal his physical body, but it completely flipped his entire worldview and how he looks at everything. And we all can have some of that by doing different practices. It's
without needing to get meningitis, right?
Yes. I don't want to get meningitis.
Well, often in our meditation play shops, I make the point that any conscious sentient being out there, and that certainly includes all of your audience, has the capacity to deeply engage with the same kind of forces, entities, and
love, force,
and realms that I encountered on my journey. And that's in fact something that we teach in our meditation play shops, based on the NDE scale that was generated by Bruce Grayson back in the early 1980s, where you can take those 16 elements and start to look at using your meditative practice to cultivate those kinds of conditions in your meditative experience. So, and we've had wonderful results with a lot of people who have used sacred acoustics around the world, who have taken our workshops, this kind of thing, with people coming into a discovery of a much grander sense of connection with the universe, with souls of departed loved ones, with this God force of healing, coming into wholeness through a meditative practice. And really, to me, within 2 years of my coma, I'd read about 150 books on science, physics, extraordinary experience, etc. But I came to realize, no, you can read all these books, but unless you can dive in and explore consciousness, you're not really going to come to any deeper understanding. And since then, I've used sacred acoustics pretty much daily. An hour to a day I try to meditate, and it's made a tremendous difference in my life, and certainly helped me to reconnect, not just to remember various elements of my NDE, but to actively engage with the guides, with the various forces and benevolent kind of spiritual essence there, not to mention that incredibly indescribable sense of love, that God force that so many have encountered on deep journeys. And that's something that I can do on a fairly regular basis with my deep meditations, and which are all a form of centering prayer.
Yeah, so I'm curious, with your meditations, are you able to, have you had any sort of experience, obviously when you were in your coma having your NDE, you had such profound experiences, from what I recall, seeing the different levels, that actually you navigated with vibration, speaking of sound. And I'm curious if you've had anything that would compare or, close to that through meditation.
Well, yeah. In fact, I would say in the book Living in a Mindful Universe, I describe one of the most profound experiences of my life. And that has to do with the fact that my adoptive father, who is the neurosurgeon and very important in my life, he passed over 4 years before my coma, and yet he was nowhere to be seen in the NDE. And of course, part of that is related to the fact that I was amnesic. And in fact, over months and years after the event, I came to realize that if my father's spirit had actually been there as the prominent spiritual guide during my NDE, in spite of the fact that I had a 1 in 10 million diagnosis of E. coli meningoencephalitis in an adult, in spite of the fact that I benefited from a 1 in a billion recovery, as those doctors who wrote the case report will tell you, the fact is, if my father had been the spiritual guide, I might have defaulted more to my pre-coma materialist scientific beliefs of, you see who you want to see on the way out.
Right.
And I might have tended to doubt the whole experience. By the fact that I actually encountered a spiritual guide who is this beautiful, wonderful woman who I deeply melded with during the experience, came to know her deep truth. And her message to me was so important in my journey. And yet I knew her so well, and when I came back to this world and then started reading the NDE literature, which I only did after I'd written 20,000 words of my experience, so it would be untainted by anybody else's NDE. But when I started reading the NDE literature, I was absolutely shocked and realized, that person had to be important to me in my life, but I didn't know who she was. And that, of course, is why that story, as told in the book Proof of Heaven, 4 months post-coma, when I discovered her identity, is so important.
But you encountered your father in the meditation. He was asking
That's
about
the point,
meditation.
because
but also tell them you don't reach the same hyper reality.
Yeah. So the fact is that in Living in a Mindful Universe, we tell the full story of how I did encounter my father's soul 2.5 years post-coma, using these kinds of binaural beat brainwave entrainment for deep meditation. And that story was absolutely extraordinary. And in one simple flash of a look and a smile and a wink from him, an incredible kind of thought ball of understanding about consciousness, meditation, using sound for meditation, the reality of one mind. All of that became crystal clear. And that was an extraordinary moment gained through meditation. Now, the other point that Karen is making, very important, is as much as I've used my meditative experience to return to the realm of that NDE, and have done so very satisfactorily for many of the purposes to which I've used that, I would say I have never yet fully duplicated that shocking sense of ultra reality, way too real to be real. That I experienced in the NDE. And of course, that could be that state with my brain in that completely gone state was what was necessary to allow such a full and robust kind of expansion of my conscious awareness. I don't know, but I'll keep meditating. I'll let you know if I get to full duplication.
I could actually suggest there's research that's been done by Dr. Christopher Kerr. He's a hospice doctor in Buffalo, New York. And he runs a hospice center and did all this amazing research where he got reports and collected data from the actual patients who were dying. Up until this point, it was only clinical observations of these patients, what they were saying. But when you ask these people who are actually dying, he recorded their end-of-life dreams and visions. 99% of the people, almost all of them, reported having at least one end-of-life dream or vision. The other really important quality is that these end-of-life dreams and visions they describe them as more real than real. Exactly how Eben described his near-death experience. They say this is the most alive they've been in their whole life. They're revisiting past memories, like their life review is beginning. It seems to be a natural process when the body is dying for the brain to be set free. And it's amazing that the actual death compares to near death so remarkably similarly.
I think to clarify, my reading of Kerr is that 86% of all the patients they had described these extraordinary experiences. But
86%, right.
99% of those who described them said they were absolutely real, or more real than real.
That's correct.
Don't tell me this is a dream or hallucination, because it's far more than that. And that's where our society and our culture has so misled itself, is to think that those stories and visions were just hallucinations.
And what's so funny is when you talk about this with people, almost everyone will say, oh my gosh, my grandfather was talking about seeing his uncle right before he died.
Happened to my great aunt. Saw my grandmother. One of the last things she was doing as she passed was, my grandmother passed years prior, and she's saying her name like she's in the room, and then she passed. It's like,
Well, absolutely. In fact, my own mother passed over at age 99 in April of 2019. And her last 4 days, she was deeply unresponsive with a pulmonary infection, and a 99-year-old, that can really take it out of you. So no responsivity at all from her those last 4 days, except 2:30 in the morning, 2 nights before she passed, when she woke up, got her nurse up, said, "Call my children, my mother's here, she's really here."
Wow.
And we knew from our conversations with my mom in the weeks leading up to that she was getting very close. She was talking about these dreams she had where people were changing out her apartment. It was no longer her home. But that observation, when unfortunately the nurse did not call us that night, but when we heard about it a few days later, and of course we were then there in her presence, but she was deeply comatose, I knew that this was the real event. The fact that she saw her mother, to me, that's an imprimatur. That is what tells you that it's an actual, true, real event.
Not a hallucination.
Not a hallucination. The fact that they're seeing departed loved ones, that is one of the most universal ingredients of NDEs across all cultures, going back thousands of years across all continents, is that we come in the presence of our loved ones who've left the physical plane. And that is your indicator that you are in the middle of a very real, authentic, spiritual connection event.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that has always, when we talk about consciousness not being local to the brain, or memory not necessarily being local to the brain, like you referenced earlier, one of the great examples of that for me, have you heard these cases where someone gets hit on the head or has an accident, and then all of a sudden they speak, French, and they've never learned a lick of it in their life, or what, there's these, or learn this skill from an accident. It's like, you don't hit your head hard enough to now know how to speak a language. You know what I mean? It's like that information had to have come from elsewhere and entered your brain in the accident, right? I mean,
and that effect is called xenoglossy. It just means speaking a foreign tongue. And usually xenoglossy means one that you haven't officially learned as a language.
But getting hit on the head can give you other abilities.
Right, that's the important point, is as much as, our culture thinks, the brain creates consciousness, and then brain damage should diminish consciousness. But in fact, there's a whole set of phenomena called the acquired savant, or idiot savant syndromes, where some form of brain damage, whether it be a head injury, a stroke, autism is often the culprit. But what it does is it enables a superhuman capacity of mental function. People who can play a musical instrument who couldn't do that before.
Right.
People who can, as you say, speak a foreign language that they never officially learned. People can have incredible photographic memory after a head injury where they remember every single thing. They have no ability to forget. And that can happen in the setting of brain damage. Autistic children often have very kind of unusual skills of engagement and interpretation of pattern recognition, things that are very exotic that actually give them work, say in the government, in that sector, around kind of intelligence and espionage, that kind of thing, because their autistic filter allows them to interact very readily with this information field of the universe, much more so than the rest of us with intact brains. So important to specify, no, the brain is not creating consciousness. And the only other example I give for your audience, because I think people can get this pretty readily, and that is a set of scientific papers over the last 10 years about psychedelic substances and using brain imaging, magnetoencephalography, functional MRI, etc., ways of looking at the brain's function. And what you discover, to the shock of everyone who's ever used psilocybin or LSD or dimethyltryptamine, those powerful serotonin 2A psychedelics, is that the brain goes dark. Whatever those phenomenal experiences you're getting on taking psilocybin, or these other plant medicines, what's happening is your brain is going dark. It's not due to neuronal activity. It's not due to what neuroscientists normally think of as the brain generating any form of conscious awareness. The brain is simply getting out of the way. And that's been duplicated in numerous papers addressing different substances, but they all say the same thing. The brain does not create that phenomenal experience. The brain is actually turned off by these substances to allow the phenomenal experience to occur. So let's get rid of this silly cultural myth that the brain creates consciousness and that when your brain and body die, that's the end of your conscious awareness, because it is a myth.
And the other myth is that anytime something unusual happens, it's just a hallucination.
Right.
Oh, no, hallucination. I'm like, wait, I want to know more about that hallucination that seems so real. Because they've done studies, too, on the difference between, say, psychotic episodes and near-death experiences. Very, very different. People do not have the same type of experiences. I can't remember some of those features that are different. Can you?
Well, you mean you just get a much richer kind of soul engagement in the journey in an NDE versus the psychedelic experiences. In many ways are very contrived. They're very kind of programmatic. That is, they follow a certain pattern that's not necessarily allowing for much conveyance of information.
And one of the main things, actually, I'm just recalling, is the transformative effects. When someone has a near-death experience, they can transform their personality, all the problems they used to have, everything.
Their entire life can change.
Everything is flipped. Yeah, psychiatrists got very interested in this because around the time medications were being introduced for treating psychiatric syndromes, near-death experiences became known to Dr. Bruce Grayson, for example, who then realized near-death experiences offer much, much more than a medication can. And a psychotic episode has no such transformative effects. In fact, people seem to spiral into, much different types of personalities after a psychotic episode.
Now, and the only thing I would add to that conversation is that there is a very encouraging literature today on using things like psilocybin, magic mushrooms, to treat people with severe addictions, like the worst addictions we know, nicotine, opioids, things like that, and also debilitating fear of death in terminal cancer patients. 1 or 2 doses of psilocybin in a proper therapeutic setting can lead to months and years of complete alleviation from those addictions and fear of death. And what I would argue is that actually, since you're not using the psilocybin on a regular basis, but only as a catalyst, that you can do the very same thing through meditation. Because I would argue that what you're doing with that therapeutic setting with psilocybin is just engaging someone's higher soul. You're allowing them to connect with their higher soul in its sense of deeper purpose, which is not slave to the silly, crazy little ego things that are so deadly in the world of addiction. I mean, addictions are always ego diseases. They have to do with an ego demanding too much, and we can't always live up to that. But these scientific papers showing that with a few doses of psilocybin that you can get this incredible effect against addictions, these ego diseases, and that fear of death, which is also an ego situation. But by expanding our sense far beyond the little ego, and in meditation, the first thing I do is I let that little ego voice of Eben Alexander state a request, an intention, what have you, but then that little ego voice goes into timeout. And I think that's one of the most important things to understand is so many identify with a voice in their head. This is who I am, that running stream of thoughts in my head. I love how Michael Singer puts it in his book, The Untethered Soul. He calls that voice in your head your annoying roommate.
Yeah, right.
That is it, baby. Don't give it any more cred than that. And that's where we start to acknowledge, and Karen and I often teach in our workshops, the difference between those thoughts and the awareness of the thoughts. And it's the awareness that is the magic. And the awareness is the part that expands tremendously when you leave your brain and body at the time of bodily death. And that's what near-death experiencers have witnessed, is that expansion of that kind of higher soul beyond the kind of limitations and confinement of the brain and body and the sense of here and now and the sense of self. Because all of those are kind of illusions that are applied to this consciousness. It's actually being streamed in through the brain. The brain is a filter, a reducing valve of that primordial consciousness through which we're all connected. And that consciousness, the good news is fully made of love, kindness, compassion. It's our spiritual home. And that's where you can start to gain some optimism about our world today in your personal journey, is through these personal explorations and a realization of the much grander aspects of soul and of your potential influence for the betterment of all of existence.
Yeah, well said. And so your path and focus with meditation is specific to, or what you found to be the most effective, Karen, and I know you've gone deep into this, this path of brainwave entrainment and using binaural beats and things like that. So I'd be curious to hear you talk a little bit about the benefits of, okay, I'm going to go meditate using XYZ technique, whatever, there's so many different ideas about meditation out there, versus that approach, and then introducing brainwave entrainment, binaural beats, et cetera, and why you believe that is sort of a good path to explore.
Yeah, well, for Eben, it's all about shutting the brain down, and the binaural beats seem to be affecting the lower brainstem, the most primitive part of our consciousness in the brain. But for me, I had a different approach. I wasn't thinking about the brain at all. I was thinking about how can I, when I try to meditate, get these incessant thoughts to calm down. Because the Western mind, we all seem to have this a really great ability to think constantly. And we're always figuring things out. And I was a busy project manager at the time. I had learned the value of meditation. They started studying meditation here in the U.S. after the Dalai Lama was here, and they figured out, let's study what's going on in these monks. And what they find is after 10,000 hours of listening, these monks' brains have really changed, and it seems to affect our immunity. It helps stress levels, and who doesn't want, to be healthier and less stressful? So I thought there's value to meditating. And yet I didn't have 10,000 hours
right.
to devote, right? And so when I would be very dissatisfied with my meditation sessions because I thought it wasn't working and that I couldn't do it. And yet I kept hearing about it over and over as I learned more and more about different concepts. And I wanted to generate firsthand experience, and meditation's the foundation. So there's no way to not try to, get that foundational practice. And so it was when I found sound that I really turned a corner. And at first it was things like gongs, tuning forks, brass bowls, crystal bowls. They all emit these beautiful sort of monotone sounds, but they have this little waver in them, sort of this wah, wah. And it really seems to capture my attention and others as well. And binaural beats are really just a digital form of that same type of wah, wah sound. And in fact, crystal bowls and brass bowls are actually emitting natural binaural beats, but they have so many beautiful overtones and harmonics that it can be a little difficult to deliver them precisely. And that's where binaural beats come in handy. So we can deliver one frequency in one ear, a slightly different frequency in the other ear. That's what that binaural refers to. And then the brain interprets those two frequencies into this sort of wah, wah, steady sound. And when you start listening to these types of sounds, there is a hugely wide range of reactions, but most people will feel that they're getting more relaxed. Some will find that their incessant thoughts aren't quite as present. Others of us will find that maybe those thoughts are still going on, but we have an easier ability to focus our awareness somewhere else. And so the habit of listening to these over time, for me, I did learn to quiet the mind. And when I first learned to get quiet inside, I found a lot of loneliness, despair, emotions that I was very uncomfortable with. And I learned over time that these were just unprocessed emotions that I had put into my system decades ago, maybe even as a child, decided I wasn't going to deal with it, just put it away. We do this all the time. And when we get quiet inside, sometimes those put away feelings can be triggered. And so over time, I found myself triggering these emotions, and it gave me the opportunity to then explore these emotions, release them. And as I did that, I was able to then invite more of what I would call that essence of my soul into my body. And at the same time, I was learning techniques of heart math, where you can, and Sufi heart rhythm meditation, paying attention to the heart. And so that combined with listening to the sound really gave me the ability to, first of all, release all of the emotions that were no longer beneficial to me, and then replace it with this essence of love. I can't describe it any other way than this essence of love. And the more I was able to bring that into my system, the more I was able to then really just, it wasn't my ability, it was that the outer world just seemed to rearrange itself around me to match the resonance of this love that I was emanating. And so binaural beats helped me get there, but they can help you do all kinds of things. People use them to connect with souls of departed loved ones. Some people use them to get guidance, like Eben does very often, say, pose a question, get an answer. There's just a huge gamut of kind of possibility there. It really just depends on the listener's personal goals. The most basic thing that these binaural beats can do, and we have a pilot study that Dr. Anna Yusum, a psychiatrist in New York City, did for us, and it was published in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease in February of 2020, right when the pandemic started. And so these recordings helped people reduce anxiety over a 2-week period of listening by 26%. And the other patients in her practice who just got regular therapy but not the sound, they reduced their anxiety by just 7%. And so it was quite a remarkable difference. But not only, they measured the anxiety, but people started giving reports like toxic relationships they had been in, suddenly they were able to get out. A medical student who, was very, very stressed found that she could sleep better, she could study better. And that made her board exams improve. And so there's a lot of practical kind of results that can happen from bringing these recordings into your listening routine. And so just in case anyone's interested, you can go to sacredacoustics.com, look for the Whole Mind Bundle. Those are the exact recordings used in that pilot study. And when the COVID pandemic started, my way of kind of helping the world was to reduce that price of those recordings drastically. And there's also a free option. And now, years later, that free option is still available, because I don't want there to be a barrier for anyone who would like to reduce their anxiety and to get in touch with more of who they truly are. And that is because we are all connected as one, as Eben has been saying. And so when any of us take the time to quiet the mind, to release stuck emotions, they have my gratitude, because I know as you're helping yourself, you're helping me and everyone else in the world. And so this is what Sacred Acoustics can offer. It is one method, and through trial and error, people will find that they can combine other meditative techniques they've learned, or any other combinations that they can use to bring more power to the experience.
And I would simply add, it's important to listen to Sacred Acoustics through headphones.
Yes.
That's where you get the most power for it, because you're actually dividing the two channels. And just a brief kind of neuroscientific clarification here about binaural beats. They were originally discovered by a Prussian physicist back in the 1800s. It was discovered in the late 20th century by investigators that they could enhance out-of-body experiences and remote viewing.
That was Bob Monroe.
Bob Monroe's work, and then also the remote viewing, like Stanford Research International and other groups who studied remote viewing scientifically. They found that these sounds could greatly enhance that. And in fact, that's what attracted me to it in 2011. When I first met Karen, was this notion of the fact that every sound you've heard in your life, and that includes every chant, anthem, hymn that might have engendered a transcendental state of awareness, those are all analyzed up in the acoustic cortex of the temporal lobes, and circuits that basically have finalized their evolution in the last 2 to 3 million years. Very, very different binaural beats. They are processed way down in the lower brainstem in circuits that arose more than 300 million years ago, before mammals even walked the earth. There's a general principle in evolutionary biology that you want to get a deeper understanding of a certain function, in this case consciousness. Well, if so, follow back in time the anatomy and the evolution of various structures that are associated with that function. And that's where we find that by altering, having the slow left-right oscillation in the lower brainstem, which is what sacred acoustics and other binaural beat brainwave entrainment does, engenders this incredible ability of consciousness to be set free from the illusion of here, now, and sense of self. So that's where the real big power is coming from, and that's why I think if you read the testimonials page on Sacred Acoustics website, you'll find a tremendous range of possible beneficial effects that people have encountered.
And some people, they just want to get a better night's sleep, right? They're not interested in all of this other stuff, and they use them for that too, or just to quiet the mind for focus and writing and painting, and there's
creating,
just
whatever.
All kinds of ways they can be used.
Yeah, my oldest son, who's currently in his third year post-medical training to be a healer, a physician, he's listened to the theta file while studying for his medical boards for more than 100,000 minutes. I don't know how many.
Wow.
That's how the counter works, is the minutes. But anyway, he's convinced that his scores improved dramatically through use of theta with his study practice.
Some people will ask us after they feel the effects. They'll say, "Are these tones legal?" Because it can put you into that expanded state of awareness.
Give it a shot.
That substances can do. And also, there's ironically, there's an addiction doctor, Dr. Mark Leeds in Florida, who treats people with addiction. And he says that there are a lot of ways now they have to treat people with addiction very successfully. But what happens is, while they're going through that treatment, they might feel a little anxiety. They might have some trouble sleeping, while they're...
the withdrawal is the rough phase.
And so what he does is he can't prescribe other medications to help with that. So he prescribes the tones. And they work very well for some people. So
very cool. I'm looking, and you have a bunch on the site, which is really cool. And I'm curious how you some titled explore past, present, future, or access to infinity, or this one's for healing, this one's for sleep. How have you navigated to determine what tones work with what sort of path you're referencing here?
Yeah. Well, there's sort of a theory out there that a particular frequency will cause a particular effect. Say, 528 hertz is known to affect the heart. What we have found is that in our application is that it's not dependent on a particular frequency, but it's the combination of all of them and the harmonics that you bring. But there does need to be sort of a hook, sort of a foundation, and each recording has one of those foundations. So we do actually use 528 hertz in our heart recordings. Anything that has to do with the heart, there will be a 528 in there, but there will be all these other frequencies as well. And the technique that we use is to make sure that every frequency is harmonic to all other frequencies in the recording. And a lot of, especially older binaural beat producers, they would add things like rain or white noise, brown noise, pink noise to kind of mask the harsh digital sound of the frequencies. But when we started combining them with harmonic principles, it turned into music. And so there's a lot of really beautiful kind of compositions that are a result using these digital frequencies and synthesizers. Occasionally we do use natural instruments. Cosmic Womb is made from a chime made from bamboo from the Himalayan mountains. We use ocean sounds, rain sounds, but mostly we use those digital frequencies. And a lot of it is the invention of our audio engineer, Kevin Cossey. He has an amazing connection to kind of information, I'll say. And when he opens up his channels, that information comes. But all of it is based on, he insists on having something that is earthbound. It can't just be something he makes up in his mind. There has to be a hook. And so I remember one morning you mentioned the journey through past, present, future. That's spiral of time. And I remember one morning I woke up And I said to Eben, I said, we should create a recording that we can explore past life memories. And right at that moment, I got a text from Kevin, who lives in a completely different part of the country. He, of the U.S., he lives in New York. We're in Virginia. But he wrote and said, I've just got some direction that we should do a time traveler.
Wow.
A time traveler recording. And so somehow this idea that we're all connected, I have to think that our two higher selves are somehow having conversations, and that information is then brought down to us. So it's a combination of inspiration and frequencies, known frequencies here on Earth that create these recordings. But other than that, each recording is just sort of a magical composition that comes together in really just remarkable ways. And so each one
Beautiful.
is its own little special composition. Yeah.
Well, perhaps I will. I feel inspired to explore some of these and can report back to all of you out there listening. And of course, you can go and check it out yourself. But I definitely think I'm feeling called to explore them, and I'll keep you guys posted.
We find that beginners are really helped by this, like I was, to kind of learn how to get into these states. But they can be thought of as training wheels, really, to learn what these states feel like, because sometimes they can be rather subtle and not so obvious when we're in an altered state. But also those who are experienced meditators, experienced spiritual travelers will find that these recordings might help them to go even deeper than they've been able to do using other techniques. So there's lots of potential there.
And the only other thing I'd point out is there's a lot of binaural beat stuff out there. You can get your own tone generators and programs, apps, what have you. People often download them from YouTube, which is too bad because the sound resolution is really too screwed up by their compression to do much good. So it's imperative, even if people think they know binaural beats and understand them, check out Sacred Acoustics. It's a completely different ballgame because of the way that Kevin and Karen have worked so hard to these multi-layered simultaneous presentations of given frequencies can be very, very powerful. And the only way to really get that is to try them out. So we strongly encourage people to try them out.
It's the experience. We can talk about it, but you got to have the experience.
You really have
just
to
like
experience it
love
to understand it.
Everything else.
Yep. It's nothing surpasses firsthand experience, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So I'm curious. I mean, I feel like I could talk to you both we could do hours of this, but one of the things that I thought of that I don't recall from our previous conversation, Eben, is did you, in your experience on the other side, did you see anything pertaining to timelines? I think that's a really interesting conversation and how that ties into free will and destiny, right? I mean, it's like this, I always say our life, I believe, plays out at the corner of free will and destiny. It's all destined because it's all already happened, because time is an illusion. We're in the eternal now in this moment, as we're floating in eternity as we speak in this moment. And yet, source being as infinite as it is, there are many versions, I believe, of this avatar and your avatars. So for me, that's kind of how I come to terms with it, is our life plays out at the corner of free will and destiny. We're choosing which version we actually experience. Perhaps there's a version where we didn't do this interview today, etc. And so I'm curious, in all your exploration and on the other side, or even maybe not during your NDE, if you've had any sort of insights into timelines and free will versus destiny.
Well, I think it's very, first of all, I'm a full supporter of free will. Materialist science would try and pretend there's no such thing as free will. They'll laugh at you if you claim to have free will, because they think it's all chemical reactions, electron fluxes in the brain, right. And that's all material following laws of physics, chemistry, biology. So where would you inject any kind of free will there? They say it's all an illusion. I would say no. From the idealist perspective, it's completely the opposite of that. Free will is alive and well, and fully determines our unfolding reality. And I would say that much of what I've kind of discovered in the last 14 years since my coma involves that tremendous acknowledgement of kind of free will, but also I believe there's a tremendous amount to the concept that our higher souls and soul groups kind of plan various hardships in an incarnation. And the hardships we should look at as our allies, friends, and there to help us to grow. And so in many ways, I would say that there is kind of a predetermination of certain hardships and challenges. For example, I was put up for adoption by my birth mother, who is 16 years old, unwed, and that was the best she could do for me. And of course, to me as an infant, being left behind by my mother at age 11 days just set a stage for me to spend the next half century wondering whether I was worthy of love and whether I was worthy of existing. So it put a tremendous challenge to me. My NDE helped me to get to a very positive conclusion and affirmation of that particular part of the journey. But I think we discover that our choices are very important. That's where the life review of the NDE is so crucial, because a life review is really not experienced from you going through the events of your life, but actually going through the emotional impact of your actions and thoughts on others around you. That's what the life review consists of, is their kind of interaction with you. And that's why if you've handed out pain and suffering to others your whole life, your life review is not going to be much fun, because you'll be on the receiving end of all that. And that's why the life review is really kind of the golden rule written into the fabric of the universe. Treat others as you would like to be treated.
Now, don't freak everyone out that their life review is not going to be fun and they have that to look forward to. Because what happens is that they're transformative events. Just like in actual death, sometimes people Dr. Kerr tells stories of like World War II veterans who went back to Normandy Beach, and relived that terror. And yet, when that man relived that experience, he transformed. He resolved that issue. And so the life review is all about resolving and transforming through the lessons you learned. So you don't have to be, some people get a little freaked out that they'll have to, face all kinds of crazy stuff. But it's in a setting of learning and growth. So.
And the best advice I can give about the life review is from Karen. In teaching me about heart consciousness, she taught me about the daily review. And once you realize, your kind of spiritual nature and this kind of higher level of eternal soul and your responsibility to bring good to this world, it's very good to do this work every day. I mean, the worst thing I can imagine would be to remain a materialist scientist to the bitter end when I'm lying there on my deathbed and all of a sudden I'm seeing my loved ones appearing and I go, oh my God, I had it wrong my entire life. I wasted all that time. Why not, spend these days with that kind of knowledge of the importance of your decisions, of the interaction that we all share, that we're all in this together, and that binding force of love is so crucial for our own well-being and for that of the rest of the world. So the more we can serve to share that love and be that higher soul, that eternal soul that is here to manifest love and kindness and compassion for others, the more useful we can be to ourselves and our soul journey in this lifetime.
So I think that begs an explanation of a daily review. You don't have to do it every day, but the idea there is that when a challenging event happens, take some time afterwards, find a contemplative moment. It doesn't have to be in deep meditation because you want to still have some ability to kind of guide your awareness, but you want to re-look at that event from a broader, more neutral perspective. Look at your actions from an objective point of view, and especially how might others have interpreted your actions. That's really eye-opening. And when you're able to do this, then you can start to realize, how can I make changes in myself next time so this doesn't happen again? And that's what happens in a life review. So why not do that as you go along? I think it would keep us from storing, unprocessed emotions in our systems to be triggered later on. I think it could help us to resolve issues instead of just staying entangled in toxic relationships. And so, that daily review can be helpful.
And you also start to realize in this process how toxic the ego can be. And our society is very ill with this kind of me-focused, egocentric kind of approach, which leads a lot of people into darkness and despair because it doesn't seem to have any meaning or purpose. And once you realize the power of bringing love in and helping other people, other beings, animals, our whole world we need to be better stewards of. And that brings tremendous kind of satisfaction and purpose to life, is this, not focusing just on the me, myself, and I, but on how I can serve this world and make it a better place for all.
Yeah. Yeah. Gandhi said, if you want to find yourself, lose yourself in the service of others. And I believe that holds true because there are no others. So it is in giving that we receive, right? And so, I always say it's the good kind of selfish. It's like, okay, I want to have a good time in my life review and to receive the energetic repercussions of my actions and how I've impacted others. And so it's such a beautiful formula too, because it's a win-win. And even in the moment of doing the good deed, we know, looking at the brain, even at a physiological level, right? There's these chemicals released that, I forget exactly which ones, but, it's a feel-good experience for you as the giver. It's a feel-good experience for the receiver and for the person witnessing a kind act. So it's all the evidence is there.
Involved in that whole business, and serotonin too. I mean, there's this dance of molecules, but the important thing to remember is ultimately it's all that action and cause and effect is derived from the mental layer of the universe.
The spiritual level.
The spiritual level. It's not just
Right.
That you can explain away your feelings and say that's your dopamine, that's your serotonin.
Yep, right. That's the effect coming from elsewhere, essentially.
Right, it's coming from top down.
Yeah,
so
we've come up with this new phrase. We hear a lot about mind over matter, where if you can, do affirmations in your mind, you'll affect your reality. Well, spirit over matter is probably more apropos because it was touching the spiritual realm that healed Eben's meningitis. And when we can touch the spiritual realm, we can heal ourselves too. Some people, even when they have like a reading from a medium, they'll connect with the soul of their departed father, and the medium will tell them something about a childhood event that they just transform from. So touching some aspect of that spiritual realm is highly transformative, and that is spirit over matter.
I like that. This time has gone so quick. This, like I said, I feel like I could talk to you both forever.
We'll come back.
Yeah, that would be great. And, one of the things that I love to hear from folks is if they, obviously, Eben, your whole story documented in your book and on the last episode is a story of, synchronicity, serendipity, spiritual breadcrumbs, magic, all rolled into one. But I always love to just hear, and Karen, maybe you have one, or, Eben, since then, these little winks from the universe, these spiritual breadcrumbs. I find, stories in general are so inspiring, but these types of stories to really, create that wonder and awe. And I'm curious if either of you have any story, maybe recent, maybe far in the past, that of synchronicity, serendipity, positive paranormal story, if you will.
I'm gonna share one that we just had yesterday, and that
I have a feeling it might be recent.
You know that New York Times game Wordle.
Yeah, I know of it. I haven't played it.
Well, every day you can go in, and Eben and I play this. We play it separate, and there's one word for the day. And it's a 5-letter word, and you just put in a word, you find out which letters are correct, and you just keep putting in words until you get the word correct. And so Eben and I, actually, I should show you. Well, you hold up yours, I'll hold up mine.
All right, here we go.
Because we'll show you the proof is in the pudding. I got to find mine.
This is a mind bender to me. I mean, I know Karen and I are very deeply connected, kind of mentally, telepathically, but this one was...
So just so I'm clear, the word for the day is the same for everyone or different for everyone?
Yeah. So the word in this case was unfit. And we both started with two completely different words, but we put the same word in.
The second word, the third word, and that's completely independent of each other. We never talk about this, until we finish the game.
So how you go from dream to point,
and
or
from stare to
point
to night to unfit.
Yeah, it was That was strange. When we
Wow.
use the same words to find the word, we're like, wait, how did this
Yeah,
happen?
that's pretty shocking. Anybody who plays this game will understand that shows a real deep connection between minds.
It happened
Follow that same
It
pathway
happened
in.
another time where we were pretty close, but this was unbelievable.
Yeah,
like,
this
wait,
is tight.
what?
Wow.
So
Yeah,
that
it's-
happens all the time between us. We'll hear.
Yeah, we'll have these very strong connections.
I'll hear the
of
words he's gonna say before he says them. I mean, I think that happens a lot with couples
people
who've
who
been
know
together.
each other well.
But sometimes the phraseology is not something you would expect them to say, and you're like,
Yeah.
wait, what? So
Well, this example with Wordle is a perfect example.
Yeah.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
I mean, it's very hard to explain
that
that
happen?
away as
Wow.
just a-
coincidence.
Yeah, coincidence.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, it really is more and more evidence, that consciousness is not we're not in silos, right? And it's, the consciousness that animates my form is the consciousness that animates your form. A separation between us is an illusion. And, you hear a lot of people talking about telepathy and telepathic sort of experience, having those sorts of things, or this sort of idea or prediction that this is where we're headed. Will our ancestors thousands of years from now laugh about how we would use these, utterances from our mouth in order to communicate? I think there's probably a decent chance of that, or at least a hybrid of the two, and then you start looking at how technology, hooking up things like, nodes to the brain and seeing animals playing video games with their thoughts. It's a wild world.
What is that?
It is that. Well, this has been so fascinating. And for those who are interested in connecting with you further, obviously we've already talked about the website. Is there any other places you want to kind of rattle off how and where people can continue to connect and follow your work and get your books and all the things?
Well, sure. You can go to sacredacoustics.com, look for that Whole Mind Bundle, many other recordings, but also a free 20-minute download. Enter your email. You'll be on our mailing list. We'll send you notices of specials. But also you can go to ebenalexander.com. There's a 33-day journey, completely free there. It's an email course we put together as a companion workbook to Living in a Mindful Universe, so your listeners can look for that. And then finally, innersanctumcenter.com is a website where Eben and I host a membership platform, and so we host these monthly Q&As with folks, and there's some programming, static programming, but also we, at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, put together interviews with people we would normally have seen at conferences and workshops and such. And so our other experiencers, researchers, doctors, scientists got with us every 2 weeks. All of those are still there. People can sign up and get access to those interviews, united in hope and healing.
Great. Wonderful, wonderful. Well, like I said, I intend to go check out some of the recordings that you put together on Sacred Acoustics, and I'll let you guys know how that works for me. It's
Please do.
Yeah. And I do have one final question for you both, and it is this, my cliche closer. In 60 seconds or less, what is the meaning of life, according to Eben Alexander and Karen Newell? And you can both answer separately.
Well, I would say the meaning of life is to grow into the soul we came here to be. And I found that by necessity involves a tremendous amount of acknowledgement of love, kindness, and compassion for self and others, and that in fact it offers tremendous potential for optimism about where the world is headed. I would say our status quo is not necessarily so rosy, but I believe with this kind of awakening of conscious engagement with the universe and a sense of responsibility and purpose, that we can all come to participate much more richly in making this world a better place, and that's why we're here.
And what was that question? How did you phrase it again?
60 seconds or less, what is the meaning of life, according to Karen Newell?
Well, I think the meaning of life is very apparent to people when they get a terminal diagnosis or when they're lying there dying. that's when the meaning of life hits people really strongly. And it is all related to love, our connections with others, how we treated others, how we, demonstrated love. And so for me, this is the meaning of life. This is what people come to when they get to their deathbeds, and they sometimes have all these regrets. And so why not bring that message? Pretend you have a terminal diagnosis every day. And what would you do with yourself? How would you hold your energy? How would you treat other people? This is the meaning of life.
I love that. Yeah, I think that makes so much sense to, because you do have a terminal sentence, right? No one's getting out of here alive,
Exactly.
And so,
well, in truth, Eben came up with the phrase, nobody gets out of here dead, because our awareness will continue. You do not cease to exist.
Don't fool yourself into thinking that you get into complete nothingness when your brain and body die. That's not what happens.
Nobody gets out of here dead. I love that.
Yeah.
True. It means we got to be responsible for our choices. That's the important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well said. Well, thank you both so much for taking the time to come on and share, and for the work that you do. It has been such an honor and pleasure to connect with you again, Eben, and with you for the first time, Karen. And we'll have to do it again sometime.
All right,
well,
Brandon.
Thanks for all you do, Brandon.
Yeah, thanks
to
for
get all this out into the world.
And 1,800 plus. That's an amazing amount of work you're doing to help this world. So thank you, Brandon, for all you do.
My pleasure. And thank you all for tuning in your beautiful brainwaves and incredible hearts to this episode. Until next time, journey well. Also, before we sign off, I wanted to remind you to download the Golden Key audio or ebook as my free gift to you at goldenkey.gift using the Golden Key code POSITIVEHEAD. And please, if you enjoy my gift, leave a positive review on Amazon so others can find the book and unlock their lives with the help of the Golden Key as well.